What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I've got a short one for you. We're just going to be talking a little bit about halation and how to achieve more realistic, authentic, and clean results when it comes to halation in your films. One of the biggest mistakes I see when it comes to this effect is that the halation is just everywhere. Every edge of the frame, if it's a railing, for example, there's halation there. If it's the brim of somebody's hat, there's halation there. When we're talking about realistic film emulation, halation just isn't all over the frame. It's oftentimes not even in the frame at all. The main instances you're going to see it come to play is bright and dark contrasted regions, sharp edges, and lights, for example. So dialing in the settings using multiple plugins, I think I've talked about this in a couple of videos in the past, using the Resolve tools can get a little bit tricky, and at the end of the day, it's just not a perfect solution. Luckily, our friends at Film Convert have a development team, and just recently they've come out with a really solid halation plugin. Now, full transparency, Film Convert is a channel sponsor, but not because they reached out to me. I actually reached out to them because I love using their tools, and that's the only way I'll ever promote anything to you guys. So you can trust me when I say that this is a tool that I use all the time in my workflow, especially when it comes to halation. There is several different ways to build it inside of Resolve. I've tried those ways. I've demonstrated how to do that. DaVinci came out with their own tool for halation, the OFX plugin, but honestly, they all just fall short in comparison to this tool because of how easy it is to use, how accurate and realistic it is, and the adjustability of settings. Also, it doesn't bog down your computer at all, and I'm gonna show you how to use it right here. What we have here is a shot from my buddy Tanner Fowler. Big shout out to him for giving us permission to use this footage for any tutorials. And what we're looking at here is a scene that is a great example for halation and how it works and when it should be present. And this shot also kind of plays a role into that whole subjectivity of when would you want to use halation. It's totally subjective, but keep in mind, it doesn't make sense all the time. It's not something that should be in your face. And if it's distracting the audience, you're doing too much. You've overdone it and you need to dial it back. So that being said, this is not necessarily a scene that would make sense to have been shot on film. You can tell it's modern day. You're not doing a period piece. It's not a super like vintage feelsy cinematic piece. It's essentially what could be part of a highlight reel, which makes it that much harder to include film emulation and halation and still keep it believable. So I'm gonna show you how Film Convert makes that easy. So the first step here, we're gonna do this all with two nodes, all using Film Convert and a free LUT that's included in your copy of Resolve. So the first thing we're gonna do is drag in Film Convert, and then we're gonna choose our camera profile. And this was shot on Blackmagic film. I believe it was the Ursa Mini, the color profile that was Film Gen 4. And for the most part, that's going to handle our color space transforms. We're going to make a few adjustments though. The first thing, we're going to go to our film stock and we're going to switch this to 5213 just because I kind of like that look a little bit more. And then we're going to take our Cineon to print film and bring this to 0, which is going to output Cineon film log from this node. Next, we're going to make any adjustments you want to make to your grain. I'm just going to leave it as is because I think the stock grain looks pretty good. And then we're going to keep moving down to halation. We're just going to leave this on enabled. And what I really like about this plugin is if you hit map view, it's going to show you everywhere that the halation is making an effect on the image. And of course, you can also use all these parameters here to make whatever adjustments you deem necessary. Me personally, I like to turn the strength down just a little bit. It starts off at 50. Of course, you can crank it way up, but I like to bring it down to about 35 to 40. Now, source exposure, what that's going to do is basically tell Film Convert how sensitive it should be to the image as a starting point when it's determining where to include halation. And honestly, if you just leave it at 50, you're probably going to be fine. Highlights, this is going to turn down or up the intensity of the halation when it comes to their application in the highlights. And before we get to the rest of these settings, let's build out the rest of our node tree, get this image looking proper, and then we'll see what else we can do with the halation settings inside of Film Convert. We're just going to go ahead and label this node Film Convert, FC, and then we're going to add a serial node using Alt-S, and we're going to name this one Film LUT. Now, if we go into our LUTs here, this is just in the Film Looks folder that's built into Resolve, like I mentioned before. And we're going to take our Rec 709 Kodak 2383 D60, drag that on right here. And now we do have a Rec 709 image. Now, at this point, it's a little bit overexposed. So I'm just going to go back into Film Convert, and we're going to go to the top here in our camera settings and basic adjustments. We're going to take the exposure, bring this down just a little bit, and then we're going to turn up the saturation some. Close that window out. And you can be pretty aggressive with the saturation. So here's our image now. Everything looks super clean. We're not peaking or clipping any highlights or shadows. It's a very authentic film emulation. So I'm liking where this is at right now. Let's go ahead and scroll back down and see about changing more of these halation settings. We left off at highlights. And if we dial this back, you'll see those highlights, especially in the top here. It's like the top of the dome. You'll see if we dial this back, the color of the halation is going to be affecting that less. You're going to get more of just a true, realistic, clean highlight. If we turn it up though, it's going to start to get more and more warm, and obviously going all the way to the max doesn't look very realistic. So once again, I like to leave this setting as is, which is set at 65 by default. And then we have our contrast, which is pretty self-explanatory. You can leave this one as is. Sometimes I'll bring it back just a little bit to get a little more detail back in those shadows. And then the hue right here, if we turn on the map view once again, you'll see the hue is going to adjust, of course, the hue of the halation itself. If we dial it back, it's going to get more magenta. And then as we go up to 100, it's going to get more green. If anything, my adjustment here is going to be to make it a little more red. So I may pull it back to like -10, -15. Then we have the green strength. And the way halation works is from the source, the starting point of where the halation is generating from. Again, it is an organic chemical reaction that's happening on film stock. And so there's a taper of hue, starting at red, then off to orange, and then we have a little bit of the green strength here, which is what we're adjusting. And if we turn this up, it's gonna make that outer region a little bit more green. And I usually, again, just leave that as is, which is at 0.3. Now we're gonna turn off map view as we look at brightness right here. And this is kind of just the overall exposure of the halation itself. If we turn this up, you see it kind of stands out a little bit more. It's more in your face. As you turn it down, it's much more darker and reserved. This one, let's see, stock value is 50. Again, it's subjective. You could turn it down if you want. I think it looks most realistic as is at 50, so we'll leave it there. And then same for saturation. And this is a good example of what I mean when I say some beginners overdo and overcook their halation effects. So sometimes I'll see halation that looks like this, and it's just in your face. It does not look realistic. It's not where it's supposed to be. It's affecting the whole image, and it casts just an orange glow on the whole image. So we're gonna go ahead and reset that source exposure, and we're gonna turn the saturation back to 100. If anything, you can dial it down a little bit, and that's gonna give you just a little bit cleaner result. Next up is the spread, and this setting is just determining how far it's going to spread from its point of origin. Again, totally subjective. I'll leave it as default, which is set to 10. And then we have soften, which is sort of like the spread, but you'll see how it's different here if we go into map view. If we adjust the softening, you'll see it actually has to do with the definition of the halation, and then the spread is like how far it actually tapers. So we'll reset both of these because I think, again, that's the most realistic. And then lastly, we have the boost slider, which I really don't ever touch. You can just leave that at 0. And overall, you're gonna have a pretty realistic result just like that. So there's another quick tip Tuesday. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe. With that, I'll see you guys in the next one.